were just a group of people that felt that we were being taken advantage of, and we couldn't make it. We couldn't raise families on what we were doing, applying ourselves. Every letter carrier that I knew had more a source of income, worked on 2 jobs, 3 jobs, just to survive.
I worked as a bartender, I worked in a liquor store, and I never thought about anything else. It's just something that we had to do.
I was driving a cab from 4 o'clock in the afternoon and coming back home at 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning to take a shower, run to pick up a truck, and go do collection and do what I had to do, or delivery mail. It wasn't easy.
So we wanted to have one job and make a decent living. And that was not possible at that time as we saw it.
There is hardly any dispute in the administration, the Post Office Department, or among the business critics of the strike that the postal workers' grievances are real. A letter carrier, no matter where he lives, starts at a salary of $6,176 a year. If he lasts 21 years, he may receive a top income of $8,442.
From the time I stepped in the door, I sensed a lot of frustration and anger amongst people who had been there for a long time about working conditions, pay, benefits.
Things that weren't setting well with us was the fact that you had to wait 2 decades to reach top salary.
The working conditions were bad. We had lighting in the building where we had wires hanging across the ceiling.
I was paying $60 a month rent, and I needed half my paycheck to pay that. So I knew we had to do better.
The wages we were earning put us in a position we were eligible for welfare in New York City, and a number of letter carriers did apply and received welfare.
I knew some letter carriers who had large families who were collecting supplementary welfare benefits, and that was a shame.
Now, if you had any pride in yourself, you didn't want to accept welfare. What you wanted to get paid for what you did.
Here I am, a very proud young man, working for one of the biggest companies in the world, probably, and one of the branches of the federal government, with a nice uniform, representing the government. And here I am with no money, not making money.
We had a bill before Congress, H.R. 4, that was like a Fellini movie. Takes 5 years in the making.
See, the Congress just took the postal workers for granted for so many years, and that was part of the problem. Just thought, well, those folks will just keep on working and keep on enduring, and they just weren't attuned to how frustrated and angry postal workers had become.
And then you had the whole country during the Vietnam going against authority. You had a revolutionary spirit in the country. People didn't worry about laws. At that time, you just were out there spouting your grievances to try to make conditions better. And that's the environment we're in.
And it's time for a change. I knew that. And even though in my early years, I knew it had to be better.
I started finding people that were interested in righting this wrong. But not only that, changing the leadership of the union into a more positive way, make it more democratic, make it a union that was ready to fight for the membership.
The mood on the work floor, everybody was tense, everybody was scared.
It was a tough decision. You know, I had just purchased a house. I had 2 children, you know, my wife, you know, like everybody else.
Those letter carriers that had the 25 and 30 years, who were World War II vets, had already put so much on the line in their service to their country, and then now we're risking everything. Those folks will always be heroes to me.
Because sometimes you got to step up, weigh the consequences, being fully aware what the repercussions may be. You could get fired, buddy. You know, you could get fired. So we said, well, I'm still young. I could still start a new career someplace. Got to take a shot.
We wound up at a meeting and we called for a strike vote on March 17th.
Manhattan Center, 34th Street. And we got there. My God. We thought we was going to be in the front row. It wasn't possible. It was packed.
I didn't know it was that many letter carriers in New York City. There was about 2,600 letter carriers at a union meeting, and I never saw that many letter carriers since, except in the National Convention. So I knew it was serious.
Electricity, I mean, you talking about voltage. There it is, right there. You know, it's something that's unprecedented. It never happened. Strike against the government of the United States and postal workers. You know, you had veterans out there, World War II veterans, Korean veterans. I mean, these guys were no joke. I mean, they're serious men.
People were angry. They were screaming. And I look around, and all I saw was like a fire coming out of their eyes.
These conditions I'm talking about had so permeated the minds of the letter carriers that nothing was going to dissuade them.
So when they called the meeting to order, I'm looking to see the president or the general officers. They wasn't there. So this one guy got up and started speaking, and it happened to be Vince Sombrado.
We were impressed. I know I was impressed with him, you know, being that he was from the neighborhood. But aside from that, he was a firebrand. He was, let's get the show rolling.
And at that time, he held no position, official position in the union, but he was very charismatic, and people galvanized around him, and he just became the titular leader of this, what eventually became known as the rank and file movement.
And they're starting now to count off the machines. Machine number 1, strike, 2-1. Machine number 2, strike.
Everybody started calling strikes.
Everybody was really riled up. They wanted to go. They wanted to, they wanted to do something to make a difference. We saw that.
And we all went and we voted for that strike. And I was scared. Yes, I was scared.
Once it was taken, we all joined together. We're going to see this through.
And I remember Gus Johnson, who was the president of Branch 36 at the time, made an announcement to the media that letter carriers are on strike as of 12 midnight.
So we did it. We went out and we struck. It wasn't, a lot of old timers didn't want to strike, but once we got out, everybody got involved, and it was a good thing.
Well, once I found out that Vince Sombrado wasn't the president that day, I knew he should have been.
The perfect storm, when all the elements come together. That's what happened in 1970, March 17th, 1970. All the elements of the universe came together. Bang.
In my truck, I had some oak tag. Just happened to be there. They took it out. They wrote out on strike, and that's how. There was no preparation, none of that.
For the first time ever, letter carriers went on strike, and mail service in and out of New York was suspended. The government immediately obtained a court order against the strike, and union leaders ordered the carriers back to work. Many refused.
I don't like to go on strike, but we must because they've been pussyfooting too long.
You can't live in New York City on what they're giving us.
I've been told I'm eligible for welfare,
but I don't want to take welfare.
We want to work, but this is the only means we have of letting Congress know that we cannot take it any longer. Either they give us what we should have, or we will stay out on strike until hell freezes over.
Everybody was together. It was united, and we felt strong, and we felt we had a presence. You know, it wasn't like we were just out there being out there, but we felt like we had a presence. The people were for us, the public was for us, and we knew what we were doing.
The next day, nobody came to work. I mean, you heard them, 97% of the carriers. That's after all the pressure was put on us. Still 97% were out.
Back in those days, there was no cell phones, no internet. So many of us carried these little portable radios, and we would listen for news of what was going on, how this was being reported, and really, importantly, was anybody else going to be joining us?
In New York City and in some parts of Connecticut and New Jersey, the letter carriers are still carrying no letters. Their strike is illegal, but there is not much the government can do about it. A postal official was asked, what about the mail now lying in the street boxes and the post offices? And he said it would just lie there. Well, he was asked, what about perishables? And he said, they will just have to perish.
I never could have imagined that it reached the proportions that it did. Only in that, in retrospect, as I think about it, because of the environment we're in. It wasn't only me, it wasn't only the rank and file that it was everybody felt the same way. So it was just a question that, the way I described it, it was a volcano and all it needed was a catalyst to set it off. The next thing you know, we're on strike, and the national offices are telling us to go back to work.
When much of the country was already out on strike, we were feeling like this was something that we could prevail in if we just had the support of our national leaders, and it was very, very frustrating, and we were very, very angry that that wasn't happening.
The first obligation of the president, which at that time was Mr. Rademacher, he had to preserve the union.
The president of the National Association of Letter Carriers, James Rademacher, before going off to meet with Labor Secretary Schultz, carefully walked the line between the illegality of the walkout and the possibility of an extended tie-up.
Undoubtedly, unless some satisfaction comes of the meeting that is about to take place, that we can anticipate that on Monday there will be no mail delivery in the entire nation.
Rademacher was walking, who was the president of the National Union at that time, was walking a very, very fine line and trying to navigate this thing in a way where he could still capitalize on the fact that most postal workers were on strike, but not have the government come down and use the laws that were in place, because this was illegal.
They'll fine you X amount of dollars, take away many rights that the National had, and it'll destroy the union.
When you're hearing stories about threats that we would all be fired, that union leaders were going to be jailed, it starts to wear down your enthusiasm.
But we were out there every day. We were out there every day in front of our installations.
We wouldn't let no one go into the post office. And then the supervisor came and told us to, can we move across the street? And we would move.
They passed out signs and we was walking around the building. A couple of clerks tried to get in the building. They wouldn't allow them in the building. And that was my first day on the strike. I didn't know how important it was that day, but to me, that was one of the most important days of my life.
We want to go back to work, but we don't want to go back under collective begging. We want to go back under collective bargaining.
Collective bargaining, I think, was a good term because remember that in order for letter carriers or any other postal workers to get a raise before collective bargaining, an act of Congress had to be passed. And over again, we would plead our case to Congress to no avail.
Once we went out, I think we felt we did a good thing. you know, because after we did go out, it was none really. We were there now, so you just keep going.
Not once did I falter in my belief. Neither did my colleagues, my co-workers that were on the line. We were as one.
At this time, we take the position, the rank and file, the people that are out in the street, the people that carry the bags, the people that sort the mail, that it's up to Congress to give us something, show us good faith, put something on the tables.
Once we started, I was caught up in the euphoria of how we were up against the greatest government in the world, and they couldn't do anything about it. I was, to be honest, I'll bring it down to that we were right, and they couldn't do anything about it except accede sooner or later to what we were demanding. I thought we were going to win, and I never had a doubt about it, that they were going to have to give in.
The first reports started coming in that other branches in the New York metro area were going out, and we would cheer every time we'd hear about that. That then spread over the next day or so, as I recall, to other major cities on the eastern seaboard.
And that's when the word started to come in. That Pittsburgh went out, and Philadelphia, and wow.
In Minneapolis, carriers voted after the Washington Agreement to strike at midnight tonight, saying Congress has consistently given us promises. We're not going to work merely for more promises. And Pittsburgh postal leaders said their members would carry no mail tomorrow.
Defiance began early in the morning here in Chicago when about 50 mailmen on the picket line voted to stay on strike despite a back-to-work court order.
Well, what if what you're doing is illegal?
I don't care. Now, I know it's against the law. That's in the Constitution. It's in my contract. If they want to put me in jail, put me in jail. But they haven't got a jail big enough to put all of us in.
Cleveland, Minneapolis, Jersey, Detroit, Chicago. Just look at this whole country is it burning up.
Once you start hearing these other states going out, you said, wow, look at this. Look what we started, you know, and it was a great thing.
And then I remember what I thought was a pivotal moment, at least it was for me. And that was when we heard that Branch 9 in Minneapolis, that the letter carriers had announced that they were going on strike. And I said to all of my fellow carriers on the picket line, you know, I think we've got them. I think we're going to win this thing. Well, we're going to be okay, because if the carriers in the heartland of America are going out on strike, then it's all going to be good.
Once it came about, there was total support. Everybody joined in, and I've always said it. I compliment the clerks for joining us, mail handlers, truck drivers. Of course, without them, you're not going to succeed.
And to know that your friends, I'm talking about the clerks, they were out there with us. That was big. Having the clerks helping us, that was big.
Even some of the supervisors, they were out there, you know, and with the clerks being out there, the motor vehicle drivers, the mail handlers being out there, it really prevailed everything.
Some visible early effects of the mail strike. Stock market volume was down. Much more business was transacted by telephone and teletype, special messengers carrying stock certificates and documents normally handled by mail. In the financial district, there was no way to schedule a stockholders meeting because there was no way to notify the stockholders or mail out the proxy statements. Credit cards could still pay for services, but cardholders could not be billed and could not pay what they owed.
We stopped a whole lot of things. We stopped Wall Street. We stopped a lot of businesses, insurance companies. All this came through the mail.
There was no electronic mailing and what have you. Everything was done through the mail. Documents, money, transfer stocks. I can imagine it had to be crazy.
Good evening. On Monday, I will meet my constitutional obligation to see that the mails go through. With those words, President Nixon faced up to an unprecedented crisis in the post office, the first strike in the 196 years since Benjamin Franklin set up the system. It is a domestic crisis with a potential economic impact, perhaps the greatest since the Depression. Since Wednesday, when 6,500 New York City letter carriers refused to shoulder their mail pouches, the strike has spread from coast to coast. Now it directly affects 14 states and has involved about 200,000 postal workers.
I'm sure Nixon, the government, was feeling pressure to end this strike. Keep in mind, there was no electronic communications in those days. Wall Street was in New York, and this had an effect on the economy. So we were in a advantageous position.
Last Saturday, I pledged to the nation that if the current situation existed on Monday, today, that I would take action to fulfill my constitutional obligation. I have just now directed the activation of the men of the various military organizations to begin in New York City the restoration of essential mail services.
Can you imagine instead of having a letter carrier deliver the mail, having a guy with a bayonet walk into an office building? It's going from the ridiculous to the sublime. Boy, the carriers are the heartland of America. It's terrible.
When President Nixon came on and announced on TV that the National Guard was coming to deliver mail, that's when my wife really jumped and said, "Oh my God, you're gonna lose your job. And you better go to work because if you lose your job, don't come home."
The troops, when we heard that they came in to deliver the mail, we said, well, the president's got to do what he has to do, but they're not going to move anything.
We knew our jobs. We knew what the postal system was like, and we knew that they could bring in as many troops as they wanted. Those troops were not going to be able to move the mail.
What exactly are you doing?
I don't really know.
Do you think you're doing it as fast as a postal worker?
No, I don't. No. He must have his own little tricks because I can't find half the slots.
There was one photograph of, actually two, of a soldier with his little fur hat looking at the letter and then looking up like, where am I, or who am I, where's this going, you know? And that said it all.
We are all loyal Americans, willing to go back to work, happy to go back to work, but we will not be coerced by troops.
I didn't recognize how big it was till years later. I mean, I knew it was big, but the magnitude of it, how we actually stopped the government. I mean, I can't believe it when I see it myself. I'm answering the President of the United States. He's making a speech about striking, and I'm telling him, look, you're not going to coerce us from going back to work. I mean, it's crazy. It really is.
There was a term that was used at the time in the media, and it was the revolt of the good guys. And I think that really was a term that actually reflected the reality of not only how we felt about ourselves, but how the public felt about us.
I don't think the public knew what we was going through in the Postal Service because we never presented it to the public. And because we did our job.
Every media outlet was supportive of what we were doing. I mean, I think we had, like, in the public, we must have had 98% of people. They didn't realize how much we were working for.
And when you got out there on the strike, you saw the public, they wanted to know what was going on. You know, how was the working, you know, how was things working out for you?
I mean, they were walking back and forth and encouraging us. Don't worry, we're with you. You know, words of encouragement.
People was walking by and say, pay them what they deserve. Come on, pay them. You know, people was talking, giving us that little push.
And almost everybody would honk their horns or get out and cheer for us, bring us coffee and donuts. But we still weren't sure how this was all going to work out.
It was announced at a New York news conference, a 12% pay increase, quicker raises, no penalties for local union leaders like Gus Johnson of the letter carriers.
As a consequence of the hardships we have all endured, and because of the absolute pledges given us by many of our friends in Congress, I hereby urge and direct the members of Branch 36, National Association of Letter Carriers, to return to work. Thank you.
When I heard on day 8 that we can go back to work, you know, everybody was cheering that we got the raise.
I think everybody was just proud to be back. And everybody was just wanted to be back and wanted to get back to be there to deliver mail for the people.
They welcomed us back with open arms. It was happy to see us. Glad it's over. And I hope you get what you want. All good stuff. You felt good.
And people were happy. They were happy to get back to work. They were happy to know to themselves that they won.
People talked about the money, but it was more than the money. It was much more than the money. The collective bargaining part was the major part of the whole strike.
Now we could sit down and really bargain. I mean, we could really talk. Our union, not only because of the strike, but our union with Vinny became very strong, very strong.
To this day, we're the only federal workers that have true collective bargaining. And I can say that it had a profound effect on the Postal Service. I would argue for the good. It brought labor stability to the Postal Service, which benefits postal customers, obviously.
They didn't penalize the union. They didn't arrest anybody in the union because the country knew it was right.
We got the right to have collective bargaining. We got the right to better benefits, better working conditions.
I had a carrier. He was a wonderful guy. He never took a day off. He never called and said, it's the kind of guy he was. What was his life? His life was going to work, being a letter carrier, and watching the Yankees. He was a die-hard Yankee fan. That was his life. He loved the Yankees, and he loved his job, and he was a dedicated worker. He said to me that he had been working at that time about maybe 28, 29 years. He said, I don't know what I'm doing. This is the first time I ever felt like a man. Because he was fighting for himself.
That group of rank and file letter carriers who Vince Zombrano became the titular head of, stayed involved and worked and eventually was successful in changing the NALC to make it much more democratic, to make it much more progressive, to make it much more open to the will of the members that they represented.
When I went to Manhattan Center and saw 2,600 letter carriers in one building, most of us trying to come to a common goal, everybody there knowing that they all needed to do the right thing. A lot of people was afraid to do it. There was maybe 1,000 people that was afraid. Luckily, it was 1,500 of us that wasn't. That made a big change in the Postal Service today.
The wages, working conditions, benefits that I enjoyed for an entire career, and all the letter carriers that have followed since would not be anywhere near as good as they are now. I just can't see how that would have happened if we hadn't taken that risk.
My goal was I saw something wrong and I wanted to do something about it. That's all.
I didn't know. I mean, I was willing to go out on strike, but I didn't know that strike was going to save my job. You know, that is what was going to save me too, because I was struggling. That's about the only thing I could say about the strike. It changed my life. God, it changed my life.
It gave you a feeling that you were something. You were not just chattel. You're just not a worker. You could speak up and you can do things that made it better for yourself and for others.
It gave me, as it did so many other postal workers, an opportunity to make decent wages, provide a good life for myself and my family, and I'm grateful. And I know in my heart and soul that would not have been possible if the letter carriers in New York had not taken that action.
We were really fighting the U.S. government, the majesty of this great nation. We had them on their knees. We did. And I never really understood it then until I started looking at some of these things and say, God, how the hell do we do this?